What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabro, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well out there.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, what you been playing?
Yeah, so still not too much. Obviously, we're waiting on the big one. You know, Tears of the Kingdom's coming out soon. So I am trying to just tie up some ends, and I'm at the final chapter of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I took a small break. Not just because, I don't know, the game doesn't, when I'm not playing Resident Evil 4 Remake, I don't crave to play it, but as soon as I launch it, I'm having a blast with it, so it's in this weird spot that I kind of force myself to start, but then I love it while I'm there. So I'm in the final chapter. I might be in the final two chapters. I think I'm in 14, 15, I forgot where I was at, but I'm just ready to wrap it up, and everything we've talked about the game for weeks now, it seems still stands. The game's just fantastic. It's great to see something remade with so much care. The changes that have been made to the story and some of the voice acting aren't huge deals and actually makes more sense in this new sort of canon timeline that they're doing with Resident Evil. So it's really just good to see, and I'm excited to end this. I'm curious to see where they go. I know we discussed last time. They're starting to put smaller and smaller sort of Easter eggs of what's to come next, but again, we'll discuss that if the time comes. But the only other thing that I've been playing, still sticking with the Capcom, is the Mega Man Battle Network collection. I
nice.
Did finally pick it up. Picked it up on Steam. Playing it on Steam Deck just feels right at home there. And I'm having a good time. It's been a long time since I played these games, or even watched the anime and anything like that. And so right before the collection, Capcom did put season 1 and 2 of the anime on YouTube for free, officially through them. It's on their YouTube channel, and I jumped in. I started watching some of the episodes and some of the stuff that I could remember. But then finally, when the game came out, I jumped right in, and it's just such a fun throwback. It's such a distinguished sort of grid. It's hard to describe the game. It's a grid-based card battle, really. With a nice new Mega Man skin on it. I'm a huge fan of Mega Man. Obviously, we've discussed that before. But NT Warrior, or the Battle Network series, has always been a real special Mega Man property, just because of how just weird and distinguished and sort of alternate universe this all takes place, with the different remakes, of the Gutsman, of what Mega Man, what Roll looks like, and the double personalities with everyone, with them being the PETs in there. So it's really fun. It's really great. They have a couple of new little fast features that help kind of speed the game up, especially that first Mega Man Battle Network game was, just a lot of things hadn't been tweaked to that point. So there's some ability options where you can just make your normal Buster gun just super powerful. Like, I turned it on to see what the feature was, and I think it's an automatic 50 hit shot, which that's a card or two if for people who are familiar with the game. And I know you are too, so yeah. So I turned that off because I didn't want to make the game too easy. But I could see for the people who are a little bit newer to the series, or if later in the game gets a little bit more difficult, and you're just trying to do a casual playthrough, I don't see anything wrong with turning that on, just so you can get some of these bosses killed, and you can kill a boss pretty much in like 4 or 5 hits. So if you're just trying to do a casual playthrough, you're not worried too much about anything or getting this super hardcore run of the game, I think it's a really good option, especially for how difficult some of these games can be, with that card sort of mechanic, and always changing out the deck, and what chips can do what chips, and when you can pick multiple of a certain kind. Having that sort of cushion there to be like, at least you're not going to get stuck grinding and replaying some of these battles. So it's really cool. I love the music, re-listening to the music and going through the menu. Capcom has been really good with these collections, with tons of artworks and behind the scenes. It's really cool just because this NT Warrior series, the Battle Network series, just came and finished. It was always such a weird time for Mega Man. I know there is technically a spiritual successor to this series, in the Star Force series, which would be interesting if they do. But they're doing pretty much all the Mega Man games, so I'd be surprised if they don't do that one next. But I'm having a lot of fun time, especially when I have this sort of downtime And it just throws back to the GBA days when I'm just sitting in my bed, wrapped up in a blanket after a long day, and I'm just sitting there on my Steam Deck playing Mega Man Battle Network, and it's just like, it's 2023, and this is what I'm doing. With full pride. I have no shame in it. So that's all I've been playing. I've been playing one other thing. Really quickly, I've been playing the new, from the creators of the Genshin Impact game. They made this new, the next game, Honkai Star Rail. This version is a turn-based RPG where the Genshin Impact was a super Breath of the Wild sort of, inspired game. I played it. I've been playing it for a little while. It's a fun, casual thing. I'm playing it on PC and it's cross-save with mobile. It's not on PlayStation, but it is coming to PlayStation soon. And it's weird because it kind of gets me where like the story's really there. It's funny. These characters are all voice acted and it's there, but then quickly just hits you with all the gacha mechanics. It's like 10 tickets to get this hero, and it's like another just a random purple haired anime character. So it kind of loses me there. But the combat's actually kind of it's not fun, but it's just very casual, relaxed. So I've been playing there. I'm not putting any money into it. It's kind of just, again, I know the second that Tears of the Kingdom or if another big game were to come out before it, I will drop this very quickly. So I don't see me playing it much more past this week. Especially between after that we have things just really start picking up. We have Final Fantasy and just things are coming. I don't have time to be playing a little mobile game, but I give respect on how much care is put in there. Like I said, voice acted. The graphics are really good on both PC and on mobile. The mechanics are actually pretty interesting. They have this elemental mechanic that works, and it just works well. Being a turn-based RPG, I don't mind it being so much more on my phone. Whereas like Genshin Impact, it was just really weird to try to basically play Breath of the Wild with the touchscreen. Which just makes no sense. But turn-based obviously just makes so much more sense there. But that's all I've been playing. Those three things are really where my time have been. What have you been up to?
Yeah, so I finally kind of caught up because, as you know, I've kind of taken a little bit of a break. So I've kind of started getting back into the swing of things, and I've used some things as a primer. Like Dead Cells is always like a good, with that Castlevania DLC is like kind of a guaranteed. That Mario Kart, I always kind of play those things and kind of get back in swing. But yeah, first thing I picked up was the Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster version.
Okay.
For y'all who don't know, the Pixel Remasters, these are the ports of the versions of the game that actually came out on PC, I think, a year ago, maybe? A year and a half ago. And there was some frustration from people of like, why is this only PC only? Obviously, if you got a Steam Deck, that's irrelevant. But if you go on a Steam Deck right now onto the Steam store and you look up like Final Fantasy VI, this is probably the version that's going to come up. And basically, this is Square Enix kind of like fixing the ports that they did before, because they basically ported the crappy iOS new sprite version looking. So this is like faithful to the original Pixel versions, with all the great quality of life improvements. It has like the XP multiplier, it has the Gil multiplier, turn encounters off, auto run, and stuff like that, and then auto battle, which is a huge time saver if you have to grind. I'm like halfway through the game right now. I'm like right before the World of Ruin part. Again, not a spoiler, just for anybody who knows. I'm like around there. And so far, it's all the quality of life improvements are great. Like I basically had anything that kind of speeds things up without necessarily making it easier is what I've been doing. So a lot of auto battle, a lot of auto run, and sometimes I turn encounters off when I'm in like the main world, kind of just going from place to place, because it slows you down so much, these random encounters. And so yeah, overall I really like it. I'm like maybe 6 to 7 hours in, with those quality of life improvements in. So otherwise, I think it would probably take me closer to like 12 to 14 to probably be where I'm at in the game naturally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really great. They've done a great job. I am playing it on Switch. Reason why I'm playing it there is one thing, performance wise, there's actually pretty close parity between all the different consoles, so I wasn't really concerned about the power of the Switch. And I also just happen to have pretty much all the rest of the Final Fantasies on my Switch anyways, so I kind of just wanted that continuity, because I bounce back and forth between Final Fantasies a lot, and I just didn't want to switch consoles. And so I have like 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 to 12, Yeah, and 12, or broke Zodiac Age or whatever. I have all of those on Switch, so I was like, well, if I'm gonna go back, I might as well just get it on Switch too. But it was the same price everywhere else. It's just below $18. Definitely worth it for anybody who hasn't played Final Fantasy VI before. This is the definitive way to play it. Any console really works. I've kind of looked into it, and from what I understand, they run really well everywhere. But yeah, it looks amazing. Plays really, really well. Quality of life improvements makes it a lot more accessible. I did dabble with the multipliers just to see like how does it affect it. So I made like a new save, and I threw the multipliers all the way up. And yeah, like if you want to, you could just do like quadruple XP and quadruple gil if you want, and like control your encounters, and you could probably blaze through Final Fantasy VI sub 15 hours probably, which for anyone who knows that you could probably, that's like shaving off 10 to 15 hours depending on how robust you play. So you can actually bang through the Final Fantasy games pretty fast. So if anyone's been curious about 1 through 6 but maybe doesn't have the stomach to really grind through like 25 to 30 hour experiences per game with older RPGs, I would definitely say look into these pixel remasters, because I think they'll make them a lot more accessible, especially if you're coming from like modern Final Fantasy games. I think it kind of brings it to parity, and especially with all those systems, and then you can do the optimal equipment assignment. So basically you don't need to like go like character by character and then look at the specific, okay, what's the best sword that we have. You could just hit optimal, and then it'll optimize whatever gear you have. You could just do that for your whole party, character by character really quick. It takes like a couple seconds, and that can keep things moving pretty fast. So definitely recommend that for anybody who is kind of curious about it. Again, available pretty much everywhere. Now, the only thing is just it's basically come to console now, finally. Except for Xbox, I think. It might not be on Xbox. I don't know what they're doing there.
Xbox doesn't have it.
Yeah. Next, Jedi Survivor. I've been playing. Okay. I'm only maybe like 25% in. I actually stopped playing this just because, again, great game. Let me start there. Great game. They did a great job. Plays beautifully. Well, the gameplay is really great. The performance is spotty at times. Like, I have a lot of frame rate dips. I have a lot of screen tearing. Nothing that is preventing play at all. So it's not like a Cyberpunk situation. But I haven't seen too many people mention it before, so that's kind of surprising to me. But yeah, everyone I know that's also playing it has experienced pretty significant frame rate dips in performance mode. So that's another thing to know. I'm assuming relatively soon we will have a update that will probably fix all of this. I do think this is fixable, especially with the size of the team that worked on this. But overall, great game, really interesting continuation of the story of Cal Kestis. I love the way they've utilized the time difference between it, because this game takes place 5 years after the previous one. I won't go too much beyond that because it gets into spoiler territory, but overall, it basically takes everything that was really great about Fallen Order and I think kind of just multiplies it. A lot more environmental puzzles, more traversal, more robust combat, more robust customization. The customization is a big thing that they went crazy on, and I think it's all done very, very well. So for anybody who's curious, if you liked Fallen Order, I'm sure you will like Survivor. I think they stuck the landing on this one pretty great. I do not think it reinvents anything, so like if you didn't like Fallen Order, I don't think this one's going to be the one to fix it for you, because it really just expands on what they did previously. But overall, if you like Star Wars, especially if you like anything that is traversal, environmental, puzzly, I'm thinking Uncharted, I'm thinking Assassin's Creed. I think this one's going to scratch the itch even more than maybe Fallen Order, because it has a lot of that, to the point where it actually fatigues me a little bit, and I don't like. Eventually, I get like climbing fatigue. It's happened with like all these games: Tomb Raider, Uncharted, Assassin's Creed. I just like I don't want to like climb and like be panning my camera to try to see if I can get a vantage point or something. I don't want to do that anymore. So that's why I just took a little bit of a break so I can play other things. But yeah, Jedi Survivor, definitely thumbs up from me. Next, I bought. This is something I've been waiting to buy for like 3 years maybe. But I just wanted to get it really cheap. And I figure if I wait long enough, it will eventually get cheap. And finally it did. It went on sale for $10. And I had some points in the eShop. So I was able to get it for like $6. But the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, I've mentioned this to you, that I've wanted this for forever. But I just didn't want to spend a lot of money on it, just because I've had iterations of this collection kind of scattered for a long time, and I wanted it all in one place, but I did. If I'm gonna be rebuying things, I don't want to like break the bank on it. And finally, it went super cheap, and I've been basically dabbling with all the games, and I'm just loving this collection. And yeah, it's basically given me a chance to finally dive into the various iterations of the games that existed that maybe I haven't played every single version of it. Like, for example, there's like 4 or 5 versions of 2, and I haven't played every single one of them, I don't think. And so it was fun to kind of just compare and contrast, go back to the first one, as clunky as that one is. I was getting whooped by this ninja yesterday, so that was fun. It has my one of my personal favorites, Alpha 3. I just love that art style, but it also has 3 a new challenger, which is crazy. And it has that last version, what was it, like Third Strike or something like that, with the massive sprites on screen. Like, it's just like 90% of the screen is the character. It's ridiculous. But I just love revisiting that weird time in Street Fighter's history, that like late 90s Dreamcast era, which the beautiful animations of like the pixel art characters, where it was the perfect blend between like pixel arts and like anime aesthetic. I just really love that time, and yeah, and I love like the soundtrack of those games. So it's just been really fun to revisit those things, and overall, the collection's fine. They don't do too much to like fluff it up. Like, it's not like this insanely robust, like all this extra content. It's pretty much, you got the games, you got some cool things where you can adjust like difficulties up or down depending on what you're looking for. You can adjust speed. That's a big thing, is I speed up all the old games because like they're slow. So I just make them play a lot faster, and it's really fun. But overall, definitely recommend it to anybody who's kind of curious about the history of Street Fighter. I just wish Street Fighter Ultra 4 was like on Switch. I think it would be fun to kind of like tack that on as well. But I understand probably performance-wise why that's probably not on there, and they kind of cut it off at 3. But yeah, love the Anniversary Collection. I know you've already played it, so I won't bore you with too much there. But let me get into the main thing I've been playing, the meat and potatoes, which is Redfall.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's get into that, because I know it's a whole thing. And I've played at this point maybe just shy of 7 hours of it, 6 hours or so. So a decent amount, I think, to get like a good vibe for it. I don't know how long the game is, so I can't speak to you of like where I am in the story. I honestly have no clue, but I've been kind of dabbling with everything that I can do. I've tried out the different characters. I've tried out the different abilities. I've done the gameplay loop multiple times. I've explored a decent amount of the map. I've tried out all the different weapons. I really wanted to get a semblance of this, because I know this is kind of like a major topic right now. It's vital for the Xbox ecosystem right now. This was like something a lot of people were banking on, and so I really wanted to give it a fair shake as someone who like loves my Xbox and wants more excuses to play it, but know that it's been rough for Xbox, and we'll get into that later in the show. But so yeah, overall with Redfall, I'm kind of mixed on it. Sometimes I would honestly say, like, so for anybody who's saying like Redfall is trash, like irredeemable trash, I have to disagree with that. I've heard people describe it like that, and I just don't feel like that. I do think there is something here, but there are significant issues with it that prevent it from mattering, basically. It can be fun at times. First off, let me say this. When they say that, hey, it's crafted for single and multiplayer, I do not think that is true. You can play it as an individual. That is facts. That's what I've been doing. It is not designed for an individual player. That is such a lie on their part. Like, you can tell maybe it was retroactively thought of, like, oh yeah, I guess somebody could play it individually. There's nothing blocking you from launching all of these missions, and I suppose completing them as an individual, but there are certainly missions that, like, for example, there was one mission, this is not really a spoiler, but you have to go to a cemetery and you have to basically plant these flowers. It's simple. A lot of fetch quests in this mission, and a lot of like, go to this location and do this thing. It's pretty boring in that regard. But you go to this and you're literally surrounded by a dozen plus of really powerful vampires, not to mention the random kind of NPC enemies, and they're coming to you almost in waves. That is not something an individual can handle on any difficulty, because it's not designed for that. It's absolutely designed for one person to be facing one direction, one person to be facing the other direction, other person planting the thing, the other person, maybe fending off the vampires or drawing their attention or whatever. And it's stuff like that was really frustrating, where it's like clearly designed, like it's not designed for individuals, but they're allowing you to launch it as individuals. And that kind of goes into the major issue with Redfall, where it's like I was playing it for hours and I was like, okay, what's wrong with this? Because again, I'm an Arcane fan, and I understand that there are two different teams, but let's just say, for the sake of like discussion, let's just look at Arcane as like one body. You have three major franchises to pull from. You got what? Deathloop, Prey, and then Dishonored. Those are like the major three reference points for Arcane that most people who know Arcane would know them for one of those three things, or all three. And there's something that, as I'm playing Redfall, there's something wrong with this game in relation to those other three, who generally I like all three of those. Prey I like a little less than the other two, but I liked those other games quite a bit, and I'm like, there's something off about this game. And I finally like cracked it. I think it was like yesterday, where I finally realized, okay, this is what it is, where when you play Arcane games, despite the fact that Prey and Deathloop and Dishonored are so different from one another in terms of aesthetic and goals and kind of moment-to-moment gameplay, there is a deliberate nature to the way everything is designed, where everything is placed. Enemies are placed in certain places. You're doing certain things. There's different ways to infiltrate different things. There's different ways to use different abilities. There's a million different ways you can tackle different situations. But there's a deliberate way to everything is designed. And Redfall does not feel deliberate at all. It feels algorithmic. When you're walking around, there's no rhyme or reason to why certain characters are certain places. There's no rhyme or reason to why certain items are in certain places. Everything feels very algorithmic, and just like there's some code running in the background that kind of randomly generates different things. So it's like, we're going to put the Hollow Man cultists in this area, this area, and this area. We're going to have some vampires here, here, here. Have a blast. Oh, you just reloaded the game. That's completely shuffled, and now it's somewhere else. And there's just no care put there in terms of the design. I'm not saying that the developers don't care about their game. I'm saying, like, when you're walking through the world, I just don't see a lot of intentionality and deliberate nature to it, if that makes any sense. You can kind of feel the algorithm. You could feel the random generation, which is a shame, because in some ways you kind of feel like we're well past this point in gaming where these kind of games feel this way. Like when random generation kind of first popped up, you could feel that in maybe some of those roguelikes or some of those systematically generated open world games. But we kind of moved past that point where a lot of these games were designed more effectively. And Redfall just doesn't feel that way at all. And again, all this is to say, this is not even getting into the fact that the AI constantly breaks. The frame rate, even though it's like 30, hasn't even been the most stable thing in the world, even at the fact that it doesn't go above 30, which in my view, playing on a Series X, a sub 60 game is kind of ridiculous in my view. But again, fine, you do what you got to do. Yeah, it's not even getting into all of those and how clunky it can be, you know, when I'm doing these. I guess they're essentially boss battles, how clunky it is. So yeah, Redfall is a pretty overall disappointing game, and is coming from somebody who's given it hours and hours of a shot. And I'm still it's not like I'm still not playing it. I'm still technically actually playing it. It's not like I've given up on it, because like I'm seeing it through, I suppose, because it's entertaining enough. Like I like put on like an album and just kind of like bang through it, kind of like a Pokemon game in that way. But yeah, man, the quests are just tear-inducingly boring. It's not about anything. It's a typical survivor thing, like, oh, you're stationed in a farmhouse, we need you to go here and power this generator. Oh, you need to go here. Hey, my brother's out there somewhere, can you help find him? Like, it's the most boringly written, uncreative tasks ever. It's gotten to a point where if I launch a mission and they start playing a cutscene, I just skip it, because like I don't even want to hear it. Like, unless it's like a major like story related to the overarching plot of this game, which again is sprinkled in there, it's not even happening that often. I skip it outright because the characters are uninteresting. The cast is pretty stock, to be honest with you, and so it's like I just have so little investment with it. So as an Xbox fan, I have to say it is very disappointing, because this was one that a lot of people were banking on. Obviously, like Starfield is a huge one, but Redfall was definitely the one that Microsoft was pushing to. Like, it's like, hey, we knew 2022 had nothing for you, and again, we'll get into that discussion later. But this was the one that I think was supposed to really start kickstart like the comeback of Xbox. Like, okay, finally they got some stuff releasing from a great team. You know, they have Arcane now. This had a lot of potential, and then just playing it, it's like, what the hell, man? Like, I don't know necessarily how one fixes this game, because some of the issues scream, okay, maybe this just came out sooner, and some of the other issues is like, maybe this was just the wrong type of game for the wrong team type of situation. Like, it gives me Anthem vibes sometimes, where it's like, sure, you could have delayed Anthem 5 years if you wanted to, but it was the wrong team doing the wrong game. And personally, I do not believe that Arcane is the team to be making a game like this, and it's not like a game as a service per se, but it's kind of like a perpetually online. You could play it with multiple people. I know there's that whole Left 4 Dead versus Far Cry thing. It's that blend of things. It's not a good fit for them. They obviously excel for these kind of what I think are like single player, sometimes stealth oriented, power oriented, infiltration type games. That and then kind of moving around. That's where I think they really shine. In this game, you can't even like good luck trying to stealth kill any of these vampires. Like, it doesn't exist. Like, it's sloppy. The gunplay is fine. It is fine. There's no issues there. But like, overall, I've just been kind of disappointed with it. And this is coming from somebody who really wanted to like this game and is also still actively playing it, because I guess I like the pain. I don't know. I don't know why I'm still playing this game. But yeah, that's Redfall, and that's pretty much everything I've been playing.
Oof. Yeah, Redfall. It was going to be the game I thought that was going to have me turn my Game Pass back on and be all excited and be like, all right. I wasn't expecting this a 10 out of 10 game. But I thought it'd be a good time. But when I see it fall on every aspect, technically we knew prior to launch 30 frames. But a game could be 30 frames as long as it's a steady 30 frames and be great, when I saw it fall on every format, from technical to story wise to gameplay wise, I didn't renew my Game Pass. I was surely wasn't gonna buy the game for $70.
Oh hell no, yeah.
So it is unfortunate. I didn't know you jumped. I haven't played my Xbox actually in a while, so I didn't see you on. I didn't know you actually got Redfall. So I was excited to hear your excited, but it's also kind of bummer, right? It's like, it's like, man, this was kind of, we thought was going to at least be those stepping stones to get back up to it, but it is unfortunate.
Yeah, if you end up getting it, let me know. We can kind of, I can give you a little rundown on how to tackle that best. Yeah. But yeah, overall, it's tricky because, in terms of expectations, I really tried to temper my expectations. I didn't think it was going to be like this mind-blowing thing, but I was hoping, judging by the trailers and what gameplay I saw, like, if you can give me something on the lines of like a Division with with vampires, then like a single or multiplayer, it's like always online, but again, Division has an intentionality, and even when you're by yourself, it's almost a fundamentally different experience, because it's this like isolating, dark experience where you kind of go venture into this really dangerous city, and Redfall just does not feel like that to me. The only thing that I think that I could say they get right is like when a vampire sneaks up on you, it is scary as hell. Like, there's no doubt about that. Like, when there's like, sometimes you'll go into like a abandoned building that maybe you break through the top floor or something like that, and you're kind of looking around and you'll hear like the TV static, and sometimes you'll hear like a breath behind your ear type thing, and that's usually the voice, and you'll hear like a vampire like either feeding in the other room or like talking, and you'll see like the light illuminating from the TV. So it certainly has moments where I could totally see what they were trying to do, and at times it definitely works, but those times are pretty far and few between. So they did kind of drop the ball on this one. It's one of those tricky things where I think they dropped the ball, and I don't know how they fix this, because again, they can release patches that I think can address some of the performance issues, maybe get that frame rate up, and that maybe fix the AI, and that's all good and all fine. But it's a tricky thing where it's like, I feel like the offering of the game, maybe what they laid out and what they actually delivered are just not remotely the same thing. And I don't know how you fix that. You know what I mean? It kind of reminds me of like the Suicide Squad game thing, the reveal, where it's like, how do you fix a fundamentally flawed offering? I don't know. And then we can get more into kind of like what Phil Phil Spencer thinks about that, because it seems like he's not super far in terms of his thoughts from me as well. But yeah, it was very disappointing, because I really wanted to like this game, and I've wanted an excuse to play my Xbox for so long. It's been sitting there, not collecting dust, because I use it for backwards compatibility and stuff like that, but I've wanted like I haven't played like a proper new game on my Xbox to really push the hardware in forever. Like I don't know how long it's been. Maybe a little bit of Plague Tale at the beginning, but yeah, it's been forever. And I've been playing a lot on my PlayStation, and I'm pretty platform agnostic. So I don't actually really like it when I have like big month stretches where I don't touch one of the three. I prefer to have my Steam Deck, Switch, PlayStation 5, and Xbox in relatively consistent rotation. Like, that's my preference. And it's been a while since I've been able to have any excuse to really fire up my Xbox. And nothing's been on Game Pass, nothing coming from the first party. And so if I don't think of a random 360 game, basically like Max Payne 3 to play, I basically have nothing to play on my Xbox. And so it kind of just sits there. And I don't like that, because that's like a $500 and something machine. I want to get some activity out of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I've had that same conversation in the last couple of weeks, where it's just like, what's it doing there? It's doing nothing. I said, my Switch is about to get played for hours. You know, Steam Deck is always on rotation. PlayStation on at least every other day. And we have this sort of roadmap of stuff that's going to be on PlayStation. When we get to Microsoft, when we get to Xbox, this is like, it's always a crossing our fingers and hoping for the best, and then nothing, and then nothing, and then nothing, and then when we do get something, it's kind of a dud. So it is unfortunate that that's kind of the general consensus, I think. Yeah,
and we can speak about it later, because we're going to get all into the Xbox stuff, but it's as a closing kind of thing, where it's like, you know, there's that whole narrative where they're like, okay, PlayStation and Nintendo for the ecosystem, for the exclusives, and then PC for everything else, basically. And so there's this whole narrative, like, why do you even need an Xbox? like if you have all the other. And it's one of those things where I always bucked back against that, because I always felt like there was an interesting role that just my Xbox filled, and especially with the backwards compatibility and that Game Pass. And then when Game Pass really slowed up and the first party evaporated, that was the first time in many years, maybe since 2013, 2014, because Xbox was in a rough place before, and we could talk about that later, but that was this recently was the first time in a long time where it's like, this, I really don't have a use for this machine. And I want to use it, but I don't need it. Especially with my Steam Deck, basically took away half of my play of not only the Xbox and the Switch, but at least the Switch has Zelda. At least the Switch has these cool sales on these different indies. At least they have Bayonetta and all these different things I go back to, and my Castlevania collections and all that. The Xbox already had nothing, and so now when I want to do backwards compatibility, a lot of those stuff are also on Steam. And so I'm able to play them. Yeah, a lot cheaper too. Because usually if you buy them digitally in the Xbox ecosystem, a lot of times they're $19.99. Unless they're like a smaller game, like if you go like the Sonics, sometimes they go down to 10 or whatever. But and on Steam they're a lot cheaper. So it's basically evaporated all the playtime I had on my Xbox, which is a real shame, because I love that hardware. I love my Series X. Don't get it twisted. Like I like that console a lot. It's quiet. The quick resume thing is sick. Like I like that console a lot, but I really do think they kind of like dropped the ball on this one. So yeah, like I guess we can move into our first story. And a little bit of a downer, but I think it's important to talk about now that we're going to take a little bit of a break from the Xbox side, and let's talk about some PlayStation stuff. PixelOpus is closing. So according to PixelOpus themselves on Twitter, the studio is shutting down. Sony confirmed on a statement to IGN that the studio will officially shutter on June 2nd. According to their tweet, PixelOpus said that the studio's adventure has come to an end while thanking its fans. The tweet read, "Dear friends, our PixelOpus adventure has come to an end. As we look to new futures, we want to say a heartfelt thank you to the millions of passionate players who have supported us in our mission to make beautiful, imaginative games with heart. We are so grateful." And PixelOpus is known specifically for Entwined and Concrete Genie. I haven't played Entwined, so I've only really am speaking to Concrete Genie in terms of my experience with PixelOpus. But yeah, I was a little sad to hear about this. You never want to hear about like teams going away, especially if they're doing something a little different. And overall, you know, it's one of those things where it's a very Sony move. Like, to be honest, when I heard this, I was not surprised necessarily, because Sony, like, once upon a time, they were a lot more known for like doing stuff like this. It's just been a bit, so I was just like, oh yeah, I know they close a lot of these smaller teams, especially if they're not really like yielding results. And Concrete Genie, I thought, was like a cute enough game. It was one of those games where I feel like it was kind of just out of its time, kind of like as the moment I was playing Concrete Genie, it was screaming like PS3 era to me, and I was playing it like late PS4 era, so it just felt like many years removed. It was kind of like the wrong game at the wrong time, but overall I thought it was a cute game. Like, it wasn't a bad game at all, and so it was a shame that it didn't. I'm assuming that it maybe just didn't do too well. It didn't really yield that many results, and they were relatively early. Like, they didn't have a ton of like stuff in their backlog, and Entwined, from what I understand, it's kind of like a rhythm game or something like that. So yeah, it was a shame. But yeah, Steve, what's your thoughts on the PixelOpus closure?
Yeah, this was actually a really bummer. It was a bummer, but I'm in the same spot where I'm like, man, this is terrible. But I'm like, with what Sony is doing now, it's like, it kind of makes sense. Having this small team who have done smaller games, you know, Entwined, I remember from years ago. I mean, I played it on my Vita, so that's how to date that. I was playing it on Vita. And I remember it being something about, yeah, there's like a blue bird and an orange bird, and you had to, on the beat, collect blue things with the blue bird and orange things with the orange bird. Something very simple, but they were a very indie studio at the time, considering. I don't know if they even properly owned PixelOpus at that time. But I thought it was a cute little game, and then, again, it just kind of vanished. They vanished for years at that point. And then Concrete Genie, I do remember coming out, and I know it eventually came to PS Plus. I think I bought Concrete Genie on release. A smaller title, again. It was probably, I think it was
40.
Yeah,
30 or
$40.
Yeah.
And I think there was like a deluxe edition that brought, I don't know what it brought, for $10 more. And I had fun with the game. It did come at a time where like nothing was really out, so I did play. If I'm not even wrong, I think I platinumed the game. So I put my work in there, and I liked it. I did like the concept, but I do feel like, you know, it just wasn't as tight as it needed to be. It did feel sort of like a PS3 era type game in its mechanics. I thought it had a creative idea. I thought drawing like the, you know, creating the little creatures and having them go through the, you know, the walls and stuff like that. And I thought there was a lot of charm to it. And I thought, okay, I see him. I'm like, all right, I see these guys sort of growing now, finally getting the concept of making an actual game. You know, that game did have a beginning, middle, and end, and, you know, it had some different areas, and there was a lot of stuff to it. And it's a game that, surprisingly, it came to my mind the other day, because I remember just like, kind of just like exploring it, you know, down at the dock. So it was an interesting game, but it was a bummer when I saw this complete, because I felt like maybe they were possibly starting to grow, maybe starting to get to bigger titles. And I remember Sony, I think, partnered these guys with, or I think they were going to be half in charge of a Sony production. I'm assuming an animated film. I wonder what happened or is going to happen with that. It's vague. I remember the last time I heard about that, it was something like that, and I thought it's because I assumed they were going to bring Concrete Genie to one of these streaming platforms, a quick 3-episode type deal, and that might still happen. Who knows? But it is a bummer, you know, and they haven't said anything about what's going on with most of the people over there. I hope they get, you know, job offers at the other Sony studios, and not
they
too many
folded
people.
in,
get folded in elsewhere. Maybe some of these creative minds go push Media Molecule to start actually making some stuff. Because
do something.
Because again, I think PixelOpus had the artistic style, had the creativity, but just maybe didn't have the full-fledged force to make some really great technical stuff, especially on the hardware that this stuff was releasing on. So it is unfortunate, and, you know, heart goes out to them. But I'm hoping Sony, and they've been sort of good on that, you know, obviously giving them all job offers at one of their other studios first. So, but heart goes out to them. They, you know, that Concrete Genie game, again, don't know why that game kind of spoke to me in a weird way, but Entwined not so much, but I think Concrete Genie, I did like it. Enough for me to sit there and platinum the game. So
Yeah, the aesthetic was really cool. I remember it's like the small shanty town or something like that.
Yeah.
It was all gray, but he was like tagging the walls, and it created these little characters. It was like really cute, and again, it reminded me of that like Little Big Planet type era of Sony games where they were kind of trying to play ball with a lot, not necessarily the indie teams, but the indie artsy aesthetic, and you don't really get that. You don't really get that too much, especially these days. So it's a shame to lose one of them. That's why I think it hurts a little bit, where it's like they were doing something a little different, and with a little different, yeah, you're going to get those failures sometimes. And again, I'm not talking about failure in terms of like they didn't deliver a good product, but like maybe they just didn't yield the results that Sony was looking for, or maybe it's just not the direction that Sony's looking to move into, especially with this new generation. Especially with their increased focus on like, hey, we want more multiplayer games, we want more shooters and stuff like that. I'm not necessarily hearing like we want more like artistic tagging games, you know what I mean? So it puts them in a weird position where it's like maybe what they pitched going forward is just like not what PlayStation was trying to put out going forward, and so they get folded, which is not the first time we've seen something like that. And so yeah, hopefully everybody lands on their feet, and hopefully that they can kind of like disperse into the other teams and maybe introduce a new flavor to some of the existing teams, with them kind of like breaking up like that. So best wishes from us for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna get to the next story, which is it leads into our third story as well. So, but this was obviously the big thing, something that actually surprised me, but also just because I'm tired of hearing about it. So every time it comes up, it's a little interesting. So the UK government's Competition and Markets Authority has moved to prevent Xbox acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Announced on the government's website, the decision to block the deal was due to the implications for cloud gaming. The deal, quote, the deal would alter the future of the fast-growing cloud gaming market, leading to reduced innovation and less choice for UK gamers over the years to come, the CMA said. Microsoft has retaliated by saying it will appeal the decision, saying it is disappointed by the result that appears to reflect a flawed understanding of the market. Bold for Microsoft to come on, say that. Xbox specifically. So yeah, this is the first real big roadblock, I think, that's been going on for now. I think this whole merger and acquisition of Activision has been going on for like a year now. It's been a while, and this is the first big roadblock. Other places have been pretty good. Everyone's kind of found no real complaint. The big outlier was Sony, crying and complaining. And this is the big one where I was even shocked, where I'm like, oh, this might. And I looked into a couple other people who've been legally analyzing this on YouTube and everything like that, and they're like, this is actually not a throwaway judgment. This is something that could cause a big halt into it, and cause things to sort of ramp up in this back and forth debacle that's been going on over this. So it is kind of crazy to see that they're going. And of all things, it's not like a monopoly. No, it's the future of cloud gaming, which Xbox has been pretty much on the forefront of, alongside, rest in peace, Google Stadia. Microsoft has just done it in a 10,000 way better way. So it is shocking that that's the thing that they think is going on. And when you see some of more of these descriptions of how, like, pretty much, yeah, if these games were to be locked, you'd have to use this specific cloud gaming. And I can sort of see it, but again, it's such a weird thing that was going to happen. How'd you react to this news?
Yeah, it's one of those things, because like I don't feel any direction, positive or negative, just because I don't have a vested interest in this going through. Like I honestly don't care. Obviously, that I'm not like super enthused about the idea of consolidation in general. I'm generalized not like a big fan of that, of less independent options for consumers generally. But in terms of this deal, for me, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not a legal expert. I'm not Richard Hogue or anything like that. But in terms of kind of what I'm reading about and checking out, like I really do think that when it's all said and done, this deal is going to go through. I think it's just going to hit a lot of roadblocks that are probably going to delay it, and I think it's going to go well into 2024, maybe even to 2025 before this all dust settled. Because I think that a lot of people do have vested interest in this not going through. And so they're going to throw whatever they can out there to delay it. But I think it's in my opinion, it's an inevitability, just because when I read the real arguments against them, I just don't think most of them hold water. And I think, again, if this acquisition getting tripped up is basically reliant on a judge misunderstanding the market, which I do think this is a misunderstanding of the market. Again, this is coming from somebody who doesn't really like the idea of acquisitions and mergers generally. I don't think Sony and the people really pushing against this merger have much leg to stand on. I mean, it's just, I just don't think that them having Activision Blizzard really in any way materially changes the slice of the pie that they control. You know what I mean? And especially once you're talking like the Call of Duty stuff, like it's hard to argue against a merger and saying that they're going to destroy everything and take over everything when they're demonstrably in last place. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a tricky thing, and it's one of those things where it's like you can't argue against the merger using parameters that basically is like, we can't operate this way when Nintendo exists. You know what I mean? It's one of those old arguments. Everybody's been talking about it. I basically fall on that one. So for me, this is just a delayer as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure they will find a way to get through this. I don't think that the acquisition merger will look exactly the way Microsoft wants it to. When it's all said and done, they're probably going to have to find a lot of concessions, a lot of agreements, a lot of deals. You know, I think at some point I would not be surprised if Microsoft and Sony do come to the table and figure out something so that Sony stops slowing this process down. I think that's going to probably happen one day, because I think Sony will be able to block this, but no, but I think they're demonstrably slowing it, and other parties that they're working with. So I do think I would not be surprised if at some point Microsoft's like, okay, listen, this is going through one way or another, whether you like it or not, work with us. And I do think eventually there will be a point where Sony is like, all right, fine, but this is what we want. They're probably going to hit Microsoft over the head, and they're probably going to get some wild deal out of it. But I do think that with enough scheming and corporate shenanigans, they're going to get this through one way or another. There's too much money we're talking about here. Yeah. There's too much money shuffling around. We're billions here, and we're talking about big governments. People need to do their oversight. They need to do their job. They're going to be antsy about it. They're going to look for moments to kind of push back against these things. But when it's all said and done, money's going to triumph one way or another. So that's generally my feelings. I'm not like positive or really negative about it, just because I don't really think that this is the end of this story at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to come to this just sort of roadblock. And they're going to get past it. They're going to convince. They're going to, again, Microsoft. I know it's all Xbox, but, Microsoft has the big money. They're the ones flexing. They're the ones essentially keeping Xbox alive. If you remember from a couple of weeks ago, they had that, their calling and stuff like that. So it's going to go through. And I think even on a technical aspect, if you look at what Sony's been doing, it almost just sort of, like you said, slowing down is the perfect way to say it, because as they've been protesting this and slowing things down, Sony's been making moves out there, buying different companies. Didn't they purchase out Haven, who hasn't made a game yet? I know they were working in a second party relationship with them, and boom, they bought them out and they just acquired someone else. So they've been, even if they're long game is just to slow us down to the point where then, like, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe they do have these things start just... But then you have this rapid fire from Sony, which could be bigger if you think. Activision, Blizzard and King are obviously sort of just because they're owned in there is why they're even part of the discussion. Activision isn't the huge muscle that it used to be. It was at one point, and I get that. And the big one that they keep using is Call of Duty. They're not talking about Tony Hawk Pro Skater. That's going to be exclusive to Xbox. That's not what they're discussing. It comes down to pretty much, the mobile aspect in King and Call of Duty. Blizzard is just kind of there. The way I see it, again, I'm not an analyst in any way. I don't play those games, but Blizzard's just there for the ride. So it is weird, and I think at this point, I don't blame Sony for still trying to block this, and I think they know they're not going to stop it, but I think they're just going to try to stretch this out as long as possible before they have to strike a deal and sign whatever contract they come up with for Call of Duty, specifically Call of Duty. You know, because the next like 4 or 5 Call of Duties are gonna have this huge PlayStation logo on it, because that's just the deal they've struck in. It's sort of that long game is what they're really hoping for, and I think it's gonna get to a point where I don't think it will matter. I think Sony's slowly making these moves behind the scene that they're gonna be like, fine, well then we just have blockbuster of a title, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and the funny thing is when you look at like Sony historically, like it doesn't surprise me that they're acting this way, just because, again, first off, they're competitors, whether they like to admit that or not. They are, and this is not me in like a console war type way, but like literal corporation against corporation, they are competitors. They're competing for market share. They're gonna not make it easy on you. You know what I mean? They're gonna fight you on these things because they need to remain competitive. And Sony, if anything, has shown a penchant, and there's not from like a Sony hating perspective, but it's like they're not gonna make it easy for you. Whether it's Nintendo, whether it's Xbox, we're not gonna go out not swinging. Even simple things like crossplay, historically, we're not gonna make it easy for you. We're gonna fight it into the very last second, just because that's just the way they are. You know, I think they have their market share and they're protective of it. Sony knows, whether they might not consider Nintendo opposition, but from a at least like PlayStation or Xbox standpoint, they are winning this generation by a pretty large margin. And I think they are not keen on letting their foot off the gas, like, because they know how quickly things can switch. And so at this point, I think they're just insistent on keeping their boot on Microsoft's neck as little as they can, whether they win this fight or not, whether they are able to stop this or not, which I'm sure, as you said, they know that they're not going to be able to. Mm-hmm. They are not going to go down without swinging. They're going to try something. They're going to stop something, because they know that whether they like it or not, this will change market share, maybe 1%, maybe 5%. But I don't think they're keen on that. I think they want their slice of the pie, and they want more of the pie, to be honest with you. And I think they want to win, and they want to win by bigger margins. Because that's just how Sony is. You know what I mean? Like, they're not a particularly collaborative company. They're just not. And then you could hate it, you can complain about it, but it just is what it is. For anybody who's kind of paid attention to PlayStation for a long time, I don't think their behavior lately is surprising to them at all. Anybody who's paid attention, especially going back, like, I mean, literally from their founding, like, they've had a chip on their shoulder, and they just interface with the other companies rather harshly, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And it just is what it is. And so this doesn't surprise me. And I think when it's all said and done, the dust will settle, the acquisition will go through, Sony will move on. They'll be pissed about it, but they'll move on. And it'll be probably just one more thing one more chip on their shoulder of why they hate these other companies. They already got one with Nintendo. This will probably just be one. They obviously have that thing. For anybody who forgets, there's that whole thing about like crossplay that they held back because Xbox didn't want it once upon a time, so they hold on to the thing. They hold on to these grudges, man. So I would not be surprised if at some point this is something that Sony looks back at as one reason to have a problem with Microsoft. It's just how they are. But again, it's a temporary thing, and this will not be the last we hear of this merger. And I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of this merger in the next couple of weeks. I'm sure there will be kind of evolving things that will pop up that will kind of continue this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then for the last story, kind of like piggybacking off that previous one, we had a very interesting Phil Spencer interview that I was just completely blown away by. And this is from Jordan Serrani over there at IGN. But Phil Spencer recently did an interview with the Kind of Funny podcast XCast, and that's their Xbox-focused game podcast over there. Shout out to them. And Phil Spencer called the Competition and Market Authorities, or the CMA's, decision to block Microsoft Activision's acquisition disappointing, while reiterating the company's confidence and commitment to closing the deal. Phil Spencer also addressed the negative reception to Redfall, said there's nothing that's more difficult for me than disappointing the Xbox community, and that's just kind of to watch the community lose confidence and be disappointed. So for anybody who didn't watch this interview, it was fascinating because you basically saw the positive, super enthusiastic and excited guy on the other side of things. When they finally... It wasn't defeatist. Some people are describing this interview as like defeatist, and I don't think that was the case. It was brutally realist, and it's not something that you see very often from the somebody that high up in one of these distributors, these publishers, and some people think it's a little disingenuous. I honestly do believe that Phil Spencer was as bummed as he was coming off as, because you got to keep in mind, like, they got hit double over the head with the acquisition and the acquisition blocker and the Redfall stuff in a time where I feel like they really, really needed Redfall to work. From a public relations standpoint, not like a financial standpoint. I don't think nobody thinks Xbox is at like risk of like folding, but it's just really bad timing, and it was really rough on their behalf. And so, kind of listening to the podcast, the semblance I get, which is that like he's heard the feedback, understands the feedback, and to some degree seems like he agrees with the feedback that the Xbox community has been given, which is like, there's nothing. You've announced all this stuff and have nothing to share for it. And so that's really interesting. We got a lot of interesting dialogue about their QAing process and possibly the difference between what it looks like QA wise and hitting certain standards, internal first party versus projects that maybe were in flight during acquisition, aka Redfall, versus something that was maybe developed in-house, whatever. Obviously there are things that kind of contradict that a little bit, aka Halo Infinite, which was designed top to bottom, in-house, first party the whole time, and that even a year delayed, I think to some degree was still not up to the standards that some people would expect, especially from a main franchise like that. But yeah, it was interesting to see kind of Phil Spencer in this position where kind of openly admitting like, hey, we lost the worst generation to lose. We are in last place. They don't seem like he has confidence that they're going to usurp Sony, and so he thinks that it's a much better strategy to just excel at what they excel with, which is play anything, anywhere, with anybody, whatever. That approach, because if you're going to try to out console, they're not going to beat Nintendo, they're not going to beat Sony, and it's just an insane thing to hear from Phil Spencer. That's something that we all know to be true. That's not like a surprising thing. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Like, we all know that's true. Like, they're not going to beat Sony, at least not this generation. But it's just crazy to hear that, because if the person at the wheel of the ship is basically like, yeah, we're kind of screwed in that regard, that doesn't offer up a lot of hope for the people on the boat. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because at the very least, to some degree, you almost liked or are used to hearing some degree of delusional confidence, I think, from those kind of heads of the studios. Like, no, we're going to do it. No matter what, we're going to get it done. And sometimes you might not even hear them openly discuss the competition. Like, no, we're in our own lane. We're killing it. We're the best. You can't touch us. Look at our IP. We're beautiful. And Phil was like, listen, I mean, look at their IP. It's gorgeous. Look at what Sony's doing. Look what Nintendo's doing. And look what we're doing. I'm pissed too. And it's just sitting there. It's like, Jesus, man. Like, it's rough times. And it's certainly a PR strategy. Like, brutal honesty, I think, will resonate. Like, it resonates with people like me, who I can appreciate just you keeping it 100% real with me. I can appreciate that. But I think that that's going to throw a lot of people off, and that's not going to instill necessarily confidence in your ecosystem when the person at the very head is basically openly admitting defeat effectively. And so I really want to know what your thoughts are. I know it's a lot that he gave us in that interview, and there's a lot of points to cover, but what are your thoughts generally about what Phil Spencer said during this interview?
Yeah, it was shocking to see the interview, not with the content, because again, like exactly you said it perfect. He's saying stuff that we've all been saying. The internet, the world, this community, this everyone in gaming has said this stuff, right? We know it to be true because we've lived it. But to have Phil Spencer up there and be like, yeah, Sony beats us. Sony and Nintendo beat us in hardware, IPs, and this, and them talking about, we're not going to beat them, but and I'm paraphrasing because, again, he talked about so much, him being like, no, we think our competitors might become Amazon and Google, and when he starts discussing about cloud gaming and stuff like that. So it was interesting for him to be like, yeah, listen, we knew we had to shift, and we know we have to shift, and that's why it looked like almost that decision for the CMA to block Microsoft's acquisition due to cloud gaming was such a big hit to him. But I think this is going to resonate, like you said, it spoke to you and it spoke to me to be like, he knows what's up. Sometimes we think behind, as they're wiping their, especially Microsoft, everyone's, poor $2 trillion company, big deal. But this does kind of land, and the buck stops. We've always said it stops with them, especially when he's the head of Xbox and the face of Xbox, and he's become the face of Xbox. It's good it's not good content, but it's good for him to be like, not pretending Redfall was this fantastic game when it really wasn't, right? And you've played it hands-on, and a lot of people have agreed with it that game is, I've seen people give it a 7, and I think that's very high, and I haven't even played it. But it's good to see them being so open and like, yeah, it's disappointing, it's disappointing that none of their titles have hit, that the console, they have a strong console, but it's just not there. And it's weird because you see this sort of humanizing in him, which is really interesting, where he's like, yeah, we know we're not beating Nintendo, we can't beat Sony in these aspects, so we're trying to do our own thing in this aspect. And it's really weird, but I'm glad that he's taking responsibility, really. It's not like he's like, yeah, he could have phrased it that, it's disappointing that the community didn't see in Redfall what we saw, or something weird like that, right? Something EA would pull over our eyes, in a sense. He's just like, no, listen, it sucks that it's disappointing for the community. It sucks that Redfall came out to such negative reception, and he admits about some of the issues with Redfall, and I think he, shyly talks about how important Starfield will be, and it has become to the point. There was a point that it didn't matter what Starfield was. This is their last shot in the sort of Bethesda canon, in a sense that, this is going to be the big game, and are you going to be locking it to 30? Are you going to be doing this? And there's a lot of mixture in it. So it is a really interesting interview, but it's one I give him kudos to do, because he didn't have to do it. And I feel very mixed on how kind of fun he is as a group, just that they don't really speak to me, but I'm glad they hit him with the hard questions. In a sense, they kind of lightballed him in some aspects, but they got some of the big questions that I had. I was like, is he going to acknowledge Redfall? Is he going to acknowledge being in third place, and how they've always constantly kept bringing that up behind closed doors when it comes to the Activision merger? They've been confident, Sony beats us, Nintendo beats us, we want to work with them, we want to put Call of Duty, or RIP somehow on Switch. Yeah, good luck with that. But he says these things, in the courtrooms and stuff like that. So it's good to see that he just comes out and speaks to us as if he is one of us, and that's always a weird thing to see when you see the head of them on our side, in the sense that he agrees with what we've been saying. So it's a really interesting thing, but I give him kudos, because for I think the last year we've been talking about how Phil Spencer has been kind of not lying, but speaking out of both sides of his mouth, in a sense that he says one thing but then practices this other thing, and no, we believe you can play wherever you want, but Xbox, buy it here, do it here. We're buying these big companies, you can only buy it here. There was that whole big, Redfall was canceled on PS5, and then obviously that statement had to get retracted really quickly when that all came about months ago. So I think this could be a turning point for them, in the sense that being so open is going to affect certain people. It's going to affect us with the way we look at it. It's like, all right, maybe they're trying. But it's like, what is the exact goal? This is still the sort of the mystery, when you're saying that Sony's not your competitor, when they are. Nintendo's not your competitor, well, they are. You can be as scared as you want from Google and Apple and Amazon, but you also still have to realize that you're Xbox, and you're not Microsoft Game Studios, you're Xbox. That's still a title that you hold, and ecosystem that you are. So it was really an interesting interview for me to really listen to.
Yeah, and kind of a last couple thoughts to kind of close out. One thing, as you kind of mentioned, really solid interview. And, I was expecting it to be a little bit more softball-y, and they did kiss up to him a little bit, more than I probably would. But to an extent, you got to maintain those relationships. There's nothing wrong with that. So, like, it's kind of either, like, you push them super hard and you risk never getting an interview again, or you keep it a little bit open. And thankfully for them, I think Phil Spencer came in very open and ready to, like, go. And so he made it so, like, if they wanted to be a little bit more critical, that tone was already set, thankfully, because it would be tough when he comes in super happy-go-lucky PR mode and then you try to push him on some of the hard things. It makes it a lot more jarring, and you really need to stand on that, and not every interviewer is on that type of time. So I can respect it from that view. So great job on the interview to the XCast guys. Another thing is, I think a lot of people are glossing over one of the craziest comments that he makes, because he says it in passing, and I don't know it verbatim what he said, but basically he says something on the line of, he acknowledges the fact that he said things and that's not come to fruition, and so people shouldn't necessarily trust him in that regard. That's not the crazy thing he said. What he said at this point is, I have a couple dings against me, and you can only essentially get so many, and you might not be talking to me next time or forever. He basically alludes to the fact that they'll, like, fire him eventually if this kind of things keep happening, in terms of, like, hey, you said this and this didn't happen, like, maybe they'll call for his resignation or something like that. It's a quick comment he makes. Maybe I'm reading into it too much. That was insane to hear him say, though. Like, I was like, holy crap. That's what told me, I'm like, oh, he's pissed. Because for a second, I was like, the more cynical side of me, and let me know what you think about this, but there is a cynical angle you can have to this entire interview if you want. And it could be all strategy. And this is why I'm acknowledging that this is a cynical view. This is not necessarily the view I have, but they are in open negotiations to have active business issues getting this acquisition merger thing in. Okay? And one of their strategies was to openly admit, hey, we are losing this generation. Getting this company would still keep us in last place. We are not in any way bumping up against Sony's numbers. We can all acknowledge that is their strategy that they've openly acknowledged. And so someone could interpret this as an extension of that. It's like, okay, we have bad reception to these things. Some things, we're not in the best place right now. We are openly using this as essentially a negotiation tactic to get this merger through. Maybe now's the time to put the puppy dog eyes on and be a little bit darker in our approach, because this is the message effectively we're putting out to all these governments. May as well just, this is the time. You punch us, you're right. Like, that could be a strategy to garner sympathy from others. Again, if you wanted to be super cynical, that you could say that maybe Phil Spencer is being a little disingenuous, and maybe this is just a strategy to, like, say, like, hey, I'm with you guys on this one. Yeah, like, we're tripping, right? Like, it's almost like negging your fan base. But again, that's not what I think. But I was thinking about that, and I was like, there is a way where this is in line with some of the tone that we've seen from Xbox in the past couple months. Before even Redfall happened, there was a air of, like, open admittance of the superiority of Sony this generation that I've never seen before necessarily. And so I think that's just worth mentioning. But yeah, that quick comment he made threw me off, because I looked around. I was like, wait, did anybody else hear that? Like, they didn't even really acknowledge that, because he kind of says it in jest in, like, a quick thing. But I'm like, that's a major thing for, like, I don't know exact. I know he's, like, head of Xbox or something like that. I forget the exact position of his. But that's an insane thing for them to say, because they really do get replaced for situations like this.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm even curious if this was all because even there's another thing he said too, and again, you're the head of Xbox, and he said, going off what I remember, he was something about, like, quality 11 out of 10 games isn't what's going to save us or help us, and not what we're trying to do. And I was even shocked he said was even stuff like that where he's even talked about Xbox not being a game company almost in a sense. That's not what he said specifically, but when he said everything but that almost, and I said, wow, you don't see these heads of games companies coming out being like, nah, but we're not focused on games. This is what people have been dying and demanding from Xbox. Features are fine. This is fine. You gave us good hardware, fine. And the games you're kind of just left, empty-handed. So that was the last thing that really stuck with me that I heard when he was discussing all that. And I did remember, and I did pick up a little bit on that too, where he was like, yeah, who knows? May not have many more interviews with me. I'm like, whoa. I was like, but it's true. When you're the head of the company, the head of the Xbox, and you're essentially in charge of managing these things and managing the companies and acquisitions, and you're buying all these companies, but nothing's really being produced. I can only imagine that it's a scary time to be Phil. I wouldn't want to be him at this exact moment. Would I have done things way differently years ago? Absolutely. Do I think I could have done better? No, I don't know. But I can only imagine how scary it is and the conversations that he's had with his higher ups. So
as a closing thing, I'm gonna hold our feet to the fire a little bit here. I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna ask us to make a little bit of a prediction here. So let's see. So knowing what we know about how this generation has gone, and let's start Phil Spencer time onwards for Microsoft, his time on Xbox, especially how this generation's gone, knowing what we know now, also knowing that a huge amount of their slate that he has spoken about, Fable, Starfield, all these, the Perfect Dark remake, all of these games, Avowed, are not out yet. Keep in mind of that. So eventually Xbox will have these games, unless they're all magically vaporware. Eventually they will come out. Knowing that most of the slate is not out yet, when it's all said and done at the end of this generation, start of whatever the next console is, do you think Phil Spencer will be in this role? Because my prediction is he will not. I think if things don't go great, which again they still could, but when it's all said and done, these games don't light the world on fire, Microsoft will need to hold someone responsible, whether they are or are not. And I think that the fall guy is going to be Phil. And I think maybe when history is all played out, people will be more sympathetic to him and be like, he really did try. It was just a rough situation. But I think at the start of the next generation of consoles, Phil Spencer will not be in this role. I don't think necessarily he'll be fired, but I think he is. I think from Microsoft's head perspective, they might be like, no, we need somebody with that delusional confidence to take us to the next level, to believe in us and be the person to take us to the promised land, if you will. And I could totally see them not thinking Phil's that guy. What do you think? When it's all said and done, does he stay in this role? Prediction time.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so either. I think even if you look, everyone keeps saying Starfield's going to be the big decision, and I kind of don't feel that way specifically, because I think even if Starfield's fantastic, I think this other Fable game is vaporware. I don't think we'll ever see another Fable game.
You think that's dead?
I think that's, I think Perfect Dark, we saw a teaser 3 years ago. I think we saw a teaser, right? Isn't there like a camera?
I think maybe a logo.
Going up it's like let me rephrase it. It's a cinematic teaser. I think it's like a camera going up a tower or a building, and then there's like a quick splash screen, right? I think that was at a Game Awards like 3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
So and then didn't they just last time we even heard about that is like they're outsourcing stuff to Crystal Dynamics. That's the stuff that doesn't look good. That you're outsourcing this in-house game from a property you bought from Nintendo. When you purchased Rare. God knows how long. I don't think so. I think he's going to be held to the gun the same way that some of these other people have. We all remember the whole, what's that guy's name? Don Matrick?
Don Matrick, yeah.
He
he really screwed up, though.
He really screwed up the Xbox.
Yeah, and that was bad.
And I think he screwed it up way worse than Phil, I just think Phil is, his support is obviously failing around him, right? You know, he's not doing the crazy. We have a we have a system that doesn't need the internet, the 360 or whatever that nonsense was. Yeah. He's not doing that, right? Phil Spencer's being a little bit more honest and upfront about that. But I do think that this sort of podium he's on, and everyone says he's like this headmaster, I think that's gonna go away. I think even if he isn't necessarily let go, or he's gonna be moved, you know, they'll phrase it as he moved into a different part of the company, and there will be a new face, right? Because I think they're gonna push for something else. I think that Phil Spencer unfortunately almost continued what was going on with Xbox in the last generation, and I think they're going to want another hard reboot in a sense.
Yeah, I think when it's all said and done, the strategy is going to shift back to a more historical strategy. I understand right now their strategy is, listen, we love what they're doing over there, but we're doing our own thing. Play wherever you want. We're buddy-buddy. I don't think that's going to remain. I think eventually Microsoft execs are going to get tired of losing, and they're going to get somebody who's going to be like, screw that, we're the best. This is the place to play the games. Not, we love those consoles. No, I think they're going to take a more offensive role eventually. And that's why I don't think Phil will be the guy to do that. Because again, I like Phil Spencer quite a bit. I appreciate him. But it's one of those places where almost the death knell of a person in Phil Spencer's position, the person who communicates to the community, is when the community loses confidence in you. And one thing Phil Spencer had was he is that good dude who lets you know what it is, and was really listening to the people. And now, you know, most people I think are still positive on him, but there absolutely is a growing contingent of people who would be like, who just don't believe him. And that is a dangerous position to be in where he is, because again, when they lose confidence in you, historically, it's not long. I think he sees this generation through, but I think eventually Microsoft's going to want to pivot, and they're going to find somebody else who's going to maybe be more fervent about not this open source strategy, and more so like, no, we want to win. We want most people in our ecosystem. Things like, hey, most people already have the console, already have their ecosystem, so what we want to do is please our current one. That I don't think is what Microsoft execs want to do, because they're losing. They're being outsold 2-1 or something like that. They're not in the position, I think, to be like, we just want to please who we got. They're like, no, we need more. Like, we need more people playing in our ecosystem. And the narrative right now is, why would you want an Xbox? That is not a good place to be in. And so, yeah, I hope Phil Spencer sticks around, but I don't think he is. So we'll see in a couple years, maybe when we look back at this podcast, to see if we were right or not at the beginning of the next generation. But any final thoughts about this interview? Crazy stuff, right?
Crazy stuff. A ridiculous interview in the sense that I just didn't expect it, especially from Microsoft. You know, I would never see this. You will never see Jim Ryan up there.
Hell, Jim Ryan. Yeah, right.
Things are, you know, he won't be out there crying. Not that Phil was crying, but just there's that big, you know, crying Jim Ryan meme.
You couldn't get Jim Ryan to say Xbox, no. Let alone acknowledge loss.
Acknowledge everything. So, but good on Phil. I respect Phil a little more. Again, I feel like I was a little down on him this year and a little bit of last year, rightfully so. But he gained a little bit more respect from me. I'm like, you know what? He's not being blinded by his big fat paycheck, in a sense. You know, he's not. He does look like someone who's, at least now for sure, putting in some work to try to do what he was hired to do.
Yeah, he's talking like somebody who doesn't care if that paycheck keeps coming in. But besides that was the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabril, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.